Well, joining me now is Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Good morning, Mr Lammy. You had a good result in Wakefield. Does that mean Labour's on course to form the next government?
Well, the result represented a 12.7% swing from the Conservatives to Labour. You know, Trevor, that we won't be forming the next government unless we persuade people not to vote Conservative and to vote Labour. That's what happened in Wakefield. And if that result was replicated across the country, I would be Foreign Secretary. Labour would, in fact, be forming the government. So it was an excellent result. We need to win in those so-called red wall areas, seats that we lost in 2019. We need to pick up right across the country. Very pleased with that result on Thursday.
Well, it's great in theory, isn't it? And I think you acknowledged there that though it's a boost, the chances of that happening nationally in every constituency don't look so good. For example, in Tiverton, you came second there in 2017 and 2019. This time, the Conservatives were defeated largely because you lost your deposit. It doesn't look to me from these results that actually you are on course for that victory.
Trevor, we did well in the local elections. We did well in Wakefield. The Tories lost in Tiverton. And yes, of course, there were Labour voters there that lent the Liberal Democrats their votes so that they could see the back of the Conservatives right across the story. This cycle, this Wakefield result, Tiverton, and in fact the local elections, are people turning away for the Conservatives. So the story of the night was this is a very, very sorry night for the government indeed. Labour is on its way back, and it's on its way back for two reasons. One, because we are now the party of change in this country. You've just interviewed Brandon Lewis. It's jam tomorrow and very little today for most people in the country. And two, because we are winning Tory votes, people who voted Tory now voting Labour. That's what we need to do to form the next government, and that is what is happening.
Well, you just said a rather interesting thing. You said that people had lent, Labour had lent the Liberal Democrats their vote, which presumably means at general election they intend to cash those votes in and take them back. So what you're essentially saying, and pretty much everybody who is expert in this agrees with this, that what we saw this week was a return of tactical voting. Why not? Why doesn't Labour look at the reality and start to think about at least an unofficial pact between you and the Lib Dems? If what you really, really want to do, as you and your colleagues say every single day, is get rid of this, whatever you describe it as, Conservative government.
I don't think the voters of Britain want politicians to stitch up deals in the corridors of power. People expect to make their own judgment and decide who they want to vote for. In the end, in the 22 years that I've been in public life, it's clear to me that we have two major political parties. Those political parties are actually a coalition in of themselves. And for the Labour Party to form the next government, we have to pick up votes from people who are considering voting Conservative. That's the basis on which we'll form the next government. I see no possibility of us forming the next government by picking up a few Lib Dem votes. I've got to be honest about that, or indeed Green votes. And that is why I'm really pleased about what happened in Wakefield on Thursday.
OK, so no deal with Liberal Democrats, but one place you are absolutely certain not to pick up votes on the basis of both the polls but also the actual votes that have taken place in local elections and so on is Scotland. Are you ready for a minority Labour government in alliance with the SNP?
Well, actually, we've seen an increase in our position in Scotland under Anas Sarwar. Really pleased to see us winning again in Glasgow in the elections just a few weeks ago. So I don't recognise that. Look, in the end, Trevor,
you're never going to go back to where Labour was in Scotland. Come on. You were the dominant force in Scotland.
Categorical.
That isn't going to happen.
Trevor, Trevor, that's a very categorical statement. And I've got to say, this is a matter for the electorate. What we're seeing right across the
the
world
electorate
is that
have been saying
electorates are
for the
volatile.
last 15 years...
They can swing in lots of
They've
different
been saying for the last
directions.
15 years
We're making,
that the SNP will be the government,
Trevor,
the SNP will get 40, 50 seats in the House of Commons. I mean, electorate are pretty clear where they are.
Trevor, I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of an election that's likely in 2 years' time. Let's see where we get to. But on that result in Wakefield and indeed in Tiverton, we would be forming the next government with a comfortable majority. That's what that result tells us.
So you're not telling me no deal with the SNP?
No, we're absolutely clear. We're not striking deals with the SNP or the Liberal Democrats. We want to win outright, and we will be fighting for every single vote in every single constituency right across the country.
All right, well, let's talk about how you win. And part of this is, what do people think Labour stands for? Last Sunday on this programme, Mick Lynch of the RMT told my colleague Sophie Ridge, and I'm quoting here, "I don't know where Labour are. If someone could tell where Labour are, I'd be very happy to hear it. I think they're triangulating between what they think is public opinion in the light of the Daily Mail and the commentariat in this country." And I can't do Mr. Lynch's voice, but those are his words. Could you clarify for Mick Lynch, because I'm sure he's watching, where does Labour stand on his members' dispute and the claims? Particularly, do you back the 7% rise and the demand for no compulsory redundancies?
Well, the truth is in the name. We are the Labour Party. We're a party that's always been concerned for working people's interests. Working people who are using our transport up and down the country, who don't want to see strikes, and of course working people working within the railways. In the end, we're not in government. This is a matter for the government, Network Rail and the unions themselves. And what we've been absolutely clear on is the government should be leading and encouraging negotiations, not stoking this dispute for their own political reasons. That's what's happening. It's not for Labour to determine the outcome of this, but it is for us to say, get around the table, negotiate. None of us want to see strikes. None of us want to hurt people.
Forgive me.
Living
Hang
crisis,
about a bit.
We've got to get to work.
I didn't ask you what you'd do if you were in government. I asked you whether the Labour Party supports the demands of another part of the Labour movement for a 7% pay increase and a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies. That's nothing to do with it, whether you're in government or not. It is whether you support the demands of another Labour movement institution. What is the answer, yes or no?
Just to say, I don't want confusion for people listening. The RMT is not affiliated to the Labour Party.
Oh, the RMT
so
is not a member of part of the Labour movement?
I've been clear, Trevor, that it is not for Labour to predetermine the outcome of this. Of course, we're in a cost of living crisis. There'll be workers up and down the country who want to see an interest in their pay. And this is not just about pay. It's also about redundancies. It's also about conditions. There are a raft of issues that workers are concerned with right across the country. It's not for Labour to intervene in each one and pretend that we can negotiate or that we are on the detail of that. We aren't, is the truth of this. And if we were in government, we would get around the table. We would not play union. That is the truth of being a serious opposition that wants to eventually persuade the British people they want to run the country.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to intervene in disputes. I'm asking you whether you support you said to me you're essentially the Workers' Party, and I'm just asking what your attitude is to the demands of a group of workers. Because you see what the problem is here. It's not that you are intervening in every dispute, but you don't seem to be keen on taking a view on any of them. I'm going to be talking to Dave Ward of the Communication Workers...
Trevor, can I just...
Let me finish my question. I'm going to be talking to Dave Ward of the
right.
Communication Workers Union in a moment. His members have turned down the 5.5% offer of pay rise from the Post Office. Are you going to back them if they ballot for strike action?
Every grown-up in the country watching this programme knows that this is a negotiation. And I'm afraid it is not always the position that one party to that negotiation gets what they want. It's a negotiation, and usually negotiation ends in compromise. That's the grown-up position. You know that, Trevor. I know that, Trevor. So it's not for me to say, yes, they're entitled to that 7%. I recognise that there's a cost of living crisis. I recognise that workers are hurting. And I recognise they've got a government that's not listening. That I do recognise. But it's a negotiation. Get round the negotiation table and fix this problem.
So the teachers, when they who have submitted an inflation level pay rise, should negotiate and compromise, which essentially means that they should settle for a below inflation level pay increase.
Let me be clear, none of us want to see our school children, after the 2 years they've had during the pandemic, out of school. So I really hope that we do not see strikes across our schools in this country. I really hope that a deal can be struck.
All right. OK, let's go on to your own portfolio. It's become rather fashionable to say that we don't know what Labour stands for. And I want to give credit where credit is due, because on Thursday, you yourself made a very clear statement in which you said we are not going into the next election saying that we will enter the single market or the EU. Now, 6 years ago, you said we can stop this madness, bring this nightmare to an end through a vote in Parliament. I see exactly the opposite. It's perfectly right for you, acceptable for anybody in politics to change their mind. But I wonder if you could explain when you changed your mind on this and why.
Well, look, thank you Trevor, for saying that I've been absolutely clear. We are not going into the next general election promising to rejoin the single market or go into the EU. The position is settled. You know that I took a very strong position. I was not for Brexit. I was what would be described as a Remainer, but quite a lot's happened in those 6 years. We've had 2 general elections. We had the referendum in the first place, and actually we've also got the withdrawal agreement. We stepped out of the European Union, and I'm afraid the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again. The British people have made that decision. It has now been determined. And there are things that we can do, of course. And I've talked about financial equivalency, for example. We need a veterinary deal with the European Union. I want to have an association with Horizon so our science doesn't lose out in this country. So there's a lot we can do, but we're not now rehashing the debate that we had for the previous 6 years.
Well, that's clear that one's over. But just very, very quickly, if I may ask you, will Labour agree with the Prime Minister that it's time to import tariffs on steel imports to protect our steel industry and the jobs therein?
I saw this emerging news. I believe in free trade. It's good for everyone. Tariffs is usually a bad idea. I've only just heard this news. I'd want to get into the detail, but my instinct is this can't be right.
David Lammy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.